It is finally race week, guys, and with the Australian Grand Prix later this week, it is time finally for me to get into my absolute final predictions for the 2025 Formula One season, a season we all cannot wait for. And we have maybe the possibility of 4 different teams fighting for the Constructors' Championship, especially given how strong the driver lineups are for certain teams. And for the Drivers' Championship, we could have 4 or 5 different drivers competing to win the championship this year. But in my view, who will win the championship on the driver's side and who will win the Constructors? Let's get into that. But before we do, a couple things. Firstly, let me know in the comment section, guys, what the top 10 of the Drivers' Championship you think will be by the end of the season. And give me your top 10, obviously, for the Constructor side as well. And make sure to smash the like button on this video, because, of course, it does help the channel grow. And another final thing I want to get into quickly is the calendar we have for the season, and quickly getting into where some of the sprint races are for 2025. So this weekend the season begins in Melbourne. For the first time we're starting the season in Melbourne since 2019. Then a week later we go to the Shanghai International Circuit in China. A couple weeks later then we go to Japan, so the early morning races for us in Europe coming up thick and fast. And then we head to the Middle East in the middle of April before heading to Miami in early May. Then we begin the European season at Imola with a triple header, starting at Imola, then going to Monaco and then going to Barcelona, before then heading back to North America for the Canadian Grand Prix in Montreal. Then back to Europe for a double header at the Red Bull Ring in Silverstone, then a slight break, and then another double header at Spa and the Hungaro Ring, which takes us into the summer break. Then coming out of the summer break, another double header in Europe, and the final 2 races really of the European season, the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort and Monza. Then a couple weeks later, racing in Baku, couple weeks after that, racing in Singapore, and then a couple weeks after that, back in North America for the US and Mexico City Grand Prix, with Sao Paulo a couple weeks later, when normally those 3 races do tend to be a triple header. This season it is not. But the final 3 races of the year in Las Vegas, Qatar and Abu Dhabi, just like 2024, will be a triple header. So that's how the calendar goes from start to finish. And the sprint races for this year will be taking place in China, Miami, Spa, Austin, Texas, Sao Paulo and Qatar. And once again, yes, just like the last couple years, you can get fucked if you think I'm covering any of those sprint races. But that's the field of play for 2025. Now let's get into my predictions, and we'll start with the Constructors' Championship. And I'll start from last all the way to who I think will be the champions of 2025. Oh yeah, one more thing. Remember, please, these predictions are based off of what we've seen, really, of the cars in pre-season testing and just how we think things are going to go from this point on for the season. Of course, we don't know what car upgrades could do during the season to certain teams and their performance levels. We'll have to find that out as the season goes on. So please remember that when I'm making these predictions, because with certain teams, I might be hilariously wrong by the time we come to the end of the season. But nonetheless, let's get into it and start with 10th place, which is going to be Sauber. Pretty slow they were in testing. They were the slowest team last year, and as I said in my review of pre-season testing, there is no incentive for Sauber to be good this year, because if they finish last in the championship, they will be, for Audi coming in 2026, they will be in a decent position when it comes to having the amount of time compared to other teams to upgrade their cars. So yeah, no incentive for Sauber to actually be good. They're just passing the season by, really. In 9th place will be Racing Bulls, a team that didn't look in testing to really have that impressive of a car. It was actually probably one of the worst pre-season tests they've had in a while. Normally in pre-season they do show to have quite a bit of pace, at least early on and to start the season, but it doesn't look like that's going to be the case to start 2025. Driver lineup, of course, has got worse compared to 2024 as well. I don't really have high hopes for this team. Driver lineup will cost them quite a bit compared to some of the better driver lineups I think they're in that midfield, especially with, Williams, Haas, even Aston Martin. So, yeah, I'm just not confident about Racing Bulls. The car, I don't really see improving that much during the season. I think it probably should improve, but I don't think it's going to magically improve to the point where they're consistently scoring points, race in, race out. So, yeah, 9th in the championship, I think it will be for Racing Bulls. In 8th place, what might be quite a surprise to some of you, I am going for Aston Martin. Aston Martin in the last couple years have started the season decently well. Obviously in 2023 they started very well, but then as the season went on completely fell off the cliff of development and performance really. 2023 they could have, if they had maintained the performance they started the season with, they could have ended up second in the championship, yet they dropped quite low down compared to where they really should have been for the end of the season, again, considering just how good their car was at the start of that year. And then if you look at last season, yeah, they finished in 5th place, and yeah, they started the season about that good, 5th place through the pecking order, but at the start of the year, they weren't that far off other front-running teams like Mercedes and McLaren and Ferrari to an extent. But then, by mid-season, they were miles off, and towards the end of the season, they were almost at the back of the field. And this is all because of the issue they've had in these last couple of years of not being able to develop the car and having very poor correlation from the wind tunnel to the track. Now, yes, Adrian Newey has started this team, but he is going to be working on the 2026 car. There's no real reason why he should be working on the 2025 car, and I don't see this correlation issue magically just going away. If it does, great, and if it does, then of course I will correct my viewpoint about how Aston Martin will probably go on about their business going forward. But until they fix that issue, I think it still is going to plague them. And I think to start this season, they will probably be, say, around the 6th best team. But because they'll get worse as the season goes on, and they still don't have the best driver lineup in the world. Obviously, Alonso is doing the best job he can. Lance Stroll, enough said. I think Aston will drop off quite a bit. And I think they will end up 8th in the championship, which might benefit them quite a bit in 2026 in terms of being able to develop their car in the first half of 2026, especially if the car is maybe not quite at its best in the first half of that year. But for this year, I just don't see, again, them really magically improving on the issues that have really derailed the last 2 seasons they've had. Just ahead of them, I think in 7th place will be Haas F1. They've got a pretty strong driver lineup. I think at least when they both perform a strong driver lineup. Esteban Ocon did not have the greatest season last season. Obviously did have quite a bit of relationship issues with Alpine, but did still put in the odd very good performance. Obviously got that brilliant podium in Brazil. This season, we should see, hopefully, a bit of a return to form. I don't think this is going to be one of Ocon's best seasons in his career, but it should be a lot more back to what we were seeing in 2022 or 2023, where he was consistently finishing the points. But what will be very interesting to see is how he gets on against his new teammate, Oliver Bearman, making his full debut in Formula One this year. And in this driver lineup pairing, I do think still that Oliver Bearman will come out on top against Ocon. Couple reasons why. One, I think Bearman is a very, very good driver and has the potential definitely to race for a front-running team. But also, one thing that I think does help Bearman quite a bit against Ocon is that Bearman has already done a couple races for the Haas team and has been in and around the team for, I think, like 2 or 3 years now. So he already has a bit more of a relationship with the engineers and the team in general than Esteban has. So it's probably a bit more of his team than it is for Esteban. So I think that favours Behrman. He'll feel, I think, pretty comfortable. I don't think he's going to have that much nerves really starting the season, especially given he's already done 3 Grand Prix already. One of them obviously being for Ferrari, where he had a brilliant finish for them. So, yeah, Oliver Behrman, a driver to look out for, and I think he will come out on top against Ocon. But the reason I don't think Haas will finish any higher than 7th is because I don't think starting the season they've got a car as good as Alpine and Williams and even Aston Martin. They will, I think, over the season end up ahead of Aston Martin purely because Haas, I think, will develop better. But I think over the course of the year, Alpine and Williams will remain strong enough to keep their advantage for much of the season over the Haas team. In 6th place for the 2nd year in a row will be the Alpine team, but it will be a bit different to last year in how they got that 6th place finish. Last year it was because of some amazing results in the final third of the season, including a double podium in Brazil where they scored 33 points, which for a midfield team is absolutely massive. This year, it will be a lot more down to just consistency. Gasly, I think, will be consistently in the points. Probably in, there's 24 races, probably in at least 12, 13 of the races, he will be finishing in the points. May even grab a surprise top 5 finish, or maybe even a surprise podium if there is one available for a midfield team or midfield driver. So Gasly is the one really to watch out for Alpine. Will Jack Doohan survive the entire season? It all depends on how he starts. If he's right there with Gasly and mixing it around with Gasly in terms of performance and just where he finishes results-wise, then I don't see why Doohan won't be able to have the entire season. But if he starts the season miles off, say similar to Jolyon Palmer in 2017, compared back then to Nico Hülkenberg, then yeah, I think Doohan will be out of the car by the time we get to the Miami Grand Prix, which is the 6th race of the season in early May. So Doohan must start the season quickly. But another reason I think they'll finish in 6th is because even if they replace Doohan with Colapinto, who maybe could perform better in that car, Alpine, with getting rid of Ocon, they've not replaced Ocon with a driver who, at their best, is as good, I think, as Ocon when Ocon is at his best. They did have a pretty good midfield lineup of Gasly and Ocon, which, proved to be good for them in 2023 and on certain occasions last year as well. And that will cost them compared to the team that I think are going to finish in 5th place. So I think definitely have a stronger driver lineup and will start the year with the faster car. And that midfield team being Williams Racing, who coming out of pre-season testing look like the only team that had clearly improved from last year to this year, which is great to see for the Williams team. Their progress does seemingly continue. And the driver lineup they have really does help. Carlos Sainz now joining the team. Obviously, Carlos winning a couple Grand Prix last year. And at the moment, Carlos Sainz, you could argue, is one of the top maybe 6, 7 drivers on the grid. So Williams have got a very good driver on their hands alongside Alex Albon, who in the last couple of years has been performing as one of the top couple midfield drivers in this Williams car. So it's really an ideal situation for Williams. They've got the best possible lineup really they could have, given where they are at and how good their car is, and now a much faster car than they had last year. And if they do start the year with the best midfield car, the reason they will finish 5th in the championship is because, remember, and I will show it on screen in between my Constructors predictions and Drivers Championship predictions, Williams, because they finished 2nd last in the championship last year, in the first half of this year, they will have the 2nd most time in the wind tunnel to develop. Now, of course, 2026 is not far away, and that is a very important, new set of regulations which everyone has to prepare for. But if Williams really do go hard in the wind tunnel and, bring as many upgrades as they can and use that extra time really to their advantage, then I think Williams, as long as those upgrades do correlate to the track and work and bring them more performance, Williams should definitely finish at the front of the midfield and may even start straying into some front-running positions. Maybe they'll grab a 5th and 6th place at the odd race here or there. Or maybe even on those odd days where podiums are possible for a midfield team, maybe they will be on the podium. We'll have to see. But if they really utilise that benefit of having the second most time in the wind tunnel for the first half of this year, if they really utilise that well, then the second half of the season could be very, very good for Williams, and if you are a Williams fan. But yeah, 5th in the championship is what I'm going for Williams, and if they were to get that, that would be the highest they have finished in the championship since 2017, where they also finished in 5th, and that was the last time, obviously, they finished in the top 5 of the championship. But now on to the front 4 teams, and in 4th place, I think they'll be close to the front 3. I don't think they'll be miles away, but in 4th place, I'm going for Mercedes-Benz, which I think, even though they are a bit of a dark horse going into the season, given just how impressive in certain areas they were looking, I just think they're still a bit of a safe bet to go with in 4th place. They've got a very good driver lineup. Obviously, with Kimi Antonelli, we are waiting to see just how good he will be. I will get on to later on with my Drivers' Championship predictions whether I think Antonelli will finish ahead of his teammate George Russell. Russell, of course, based on last year's form, he is one of the top drivers right now in Formula 1, without a doubt. And if the car is a bit better this year, and Russell maintains his consistency from last year, there's no reason why George Russell cannot be a championship contender. It all depends on him, really, delivering on his end. And then if Mercedes do deliver a bit more on their end, then again, you never know for this season. But yeah, they are still the safe bet to finish in 4th, because I just think, if you look at last year and how far off they were regularly compared to the very top teams, I just think from last year to this year, there's too much for them to make up, for them to actually be championship contenders and even winning the championship. They will win races this year. There is no doubt about it. There will be races where they will have a good enough car and the drivers will, combine that with their own great performance. But it just won't be enough to be, contenders for the championship, I'm afraid. In 3rd place, a team that I said in a video a few weeks ago, I believe, that they can win the championship, but ultimately in that video I pointed out why they would not, is, in my view, for this season going to be Ferrari for 3rd place. I don't think they're necessarily terrible with their performance right now. Coming out of testing, there is definitely some positives to take for Ferrari. Their car appears on lower fuel to be pretty quick, but on the heavier fuel and on the race runs, it does appear Ferrari are lacking quite a bit at the moment, and that might continue for the whole season. And that is, again, a worry that I have with Ferrari, but also because Ferrari don't tend to be the best when it comes to development over the course of a season. We saw that last year. We've seen it pretty much every year for the last 15 plus years. I just don't have the confidence that the Ferrari are actually going to be winning the championship, especially on the Constructors side. They will win races, no doubt about it. I think they'll take probably still 4 or 5 wins or something around that, which is still a decent amount. It's just not enough to be winning the championship, though. So, yeah, Ferrari, they will have their fun this season. They will win their races. They'll have their pole positions. But on a consistent basis, they just don't have, I believe, a all-around good enough car to be delivering week in, week out. They'll have their tracks where they're quick and they deliver. But again, I don't think the car all around is good enough to where they are winning most of the time. I just don't see it, unfortunately. In 2nd place, I am going for Red Bull Racing, who, yes, do have quite a bit of a weaker driver lineup than Ferrari. But the reason I'm going for them in second is because even though I don't think they're going to start the season off massively quick, even though I do think they'll get a race win in the first 5 races of the year before we go to Miami in May, where we should start to see the first big upgrades of the season. Red Bull, even though they're probably starting the season slower than McLaren, I don't think they're as far off as they're claiming to the media. I think they're definitely still in the mix. But one thing we have to consider with Red Bull, which is going to be key, and I think will really play into Red Bull's advantage this season, is that for the first half of this year, looking at who gets the most development, Red Bull will have more time in the wind tunnel. Not a ton more, but a bit more than Ferrari and McLaren. Red Bull, when it comes to development, not all the time, but most of the time, are very good. The reason this hasn't been shown up as much in terms of their quality of improving their car over the course of the season, the reason that hasn't shown up as much, say, last year or the year before, is because, of course, they had the least amount of development in the wind tunnel in the first half of those years because of winning the championship the season before. So they've always not, had the least amount of time, really, until I think maybe the second half of last season. Even then, I think they may have had still the least amount of time. So they've not been able to have anywhere near as much time in the wind tunnel, say, in the last couple years than McLaren have had. And McLaren, of course, have made big improvements with their car compared to what Red Bull have done, really, in the last couple years. Now, I'm not saying Red Bull are going to make similar improvements to what McLaren have done. McLaren have done an amazing job at improving their car since the start of 2023. But Red Bull will be able to, I think, show this quality they do have a bit more this year than they have done in other years. And what I think will happen is by the time we get to, say, the Austria and Silverstone back-to-back, which is at the end of June, start of July, that is when I think Red Bull will really start to kick into gear, and you'll start to see them more regularly on the podium, and with Max Verstappen winning races more regularly than they will be in the first, say, 10 races of the season. And eventually, as the season goes on, this will allow them to pull away and finish in second ahead of Ferrari, who I don't think, especially in the second half of the year, will have consistently as good of a car as Red Bull will have. So do watch out for how Red Bull develop their car over the season, because again, having a bit more time, slight bit more than Ferrari and McLaren, might actually benefit them in a big way for this 2025 season. And the Constructors' champions, yet again, will be McLaren for 2 reasons. One, the driver lineup is very strong and both drivers will pick up their race wins. But secondly, McLaren, to start the season, have the best car on the grid. Not by an absolute mile. They're not going to win every single Grand Prix. But I think definitely for the first, say, 10 races of the year, I think they are going to be definitely the team to beat at almost every track. Lando Norris, I'm expecting to be very good early on. As the season goes on, though, McLaren, I don't think will be as strong in the second half of the year, purely because, as I said, Red Bull, I think, will improve their car as the year goes on. Maybe Ferrari will as well. Mercedes will have to see what they do, whether they decide to really focus on next year or whether they decide to really push hard in the second half of the year. But for the first half of the season, I expect McLaren to be very, very strong. Even in the second half of the year, they'll still pick up wins and still pick up lots of podiums. And overall, just through having that, extra bit of quality from the car in the first half of the season, combined with the driver lineup they got, I just think in the end, they will be too strong for every other team in 2025. The last time McLaren won the Constructors' Championship 2 years in a row, I believe, was the very early 1990s. So it'd be the first time in a long time for the McLaren team. But here is the table showing who has the most and least amount of time in the wind tunnel to develop for the first half of this year. This is until the 30th of June. And as you can see, it is the Constructors table from last year. McLaren in first, and then you can see all the way down to Sauber in 10th. Certain teams I don't think will take quite enough advantage of this, but I think teams like Williams, maybe even Racing Bulls in the midfield, I can see taking a bit of an advantage from this. But as you can see, Red Bull, that could be that extra 10%, I think it is, compared to McLaren they'll have in the wind tunnel for the first half of this year. Who knows? Maybe that will be the difference in the second half of the season for them winning maybe the Constructors or even the Drivers' Championship. But let's go on to the Drivers' Championship, the most eagerly anticipated championship that we want to see just how it will play out for 2025. And I have come up with my final top 10 prediction. And as usual, we'll start from 10th place and work our way up to who I believe will be Drivers' Champion. In 10th place, I am going for Pierre Gasly, who had a very good end of 2024. And since he's joined Alpine, I think he's had a pretty good time at Alpine. And with how good the Alpine car looks coming out of testing, and how good it's been since the end of last year, they've seemingly just carried that form through. I think Gasly will be, a lot of the time, finishing the points. May get a couple surprise points finishes, say in the top 6. Maybe even a podium here or there. We'll have to see how that goes. But I think Gasly will be in the top 10. He's been a really, really strong, consistent performer in the midfield for the last couple years. And I don't see that changing for this year in an Alpine car that, like I said, is continuing its form really from the end of last season. In 9th place, Carlos Sainz. He will be the team leader for Williams. And Williams will, as the season goes on, get even stronger. And I think Sainz will be a regular fixture in the top 10. And maybe even if Williams do, at certain tracks, mix it with the big boys, say Mercedes and Ferrari to a degree, maybe Carlos can finish in the top 7, top 8 a few times. We'll have to see how that goes. But I think Carlos Sainz will continue the form of last year and keep up his current levels, which are pretty much peak Carlos Sainz, what we've been seeing in the last couple of years. I don't think he can really get any better than he's performing at the moment, but the level he's performing at the minute is pretty strong and would be easily good enough still for a front-running team, not necessarily if they wanted Sainz to be their world champion, but if they wanted Sainz to contribute a good amount of points for the Constructors' Championship. So Carlos Sainz, he should be super strong for the Williams team this year. In 8th place, I am still going Liam Lawson. I just don't think he's going to be able to mix it up enough with, your Ferrari drivers, McLaren drivers, and of course his own teammate Max Verstappen. He will benefit from the car getting better as the season goes on. He will be on the podium maybe a couple times during the season, but I just don't see him really anywhere near the top 7 by the end of the season, and will, to a degree, suffer with some of the things that Perez had to suffer with, being Max's teammate. But yeah, Lawson, I just don't have very high hopes for him. I do hope I'm wrong, because I like the guy. I think he's a good driver, but I just think the quality at the top of the grid right now is so strong and is quite a bit better than the level Lawson's been at, that the only way Lawson can be right up there all the time is if the Red Bull car really has, an advantage over the rest. In 7th place, I am going Kimi Antonelli. I don't think he'll beat George Russell this season. I think it'll be a close-ish battle between him and Russell. I don't think Russell is going to absolutely destroy Antonelli in qualifying like he did to Lewis Hamilton. I think it was like 19-5 over Hamilton in 2024. Don't think it'll be quite that big. But I do think that just on a consistent basis, Russell will be too hard to stop. But Kimi Antonelli will win a race this season. I have predicted, and I'll get onto this graphic after my Drivers' Championship predictions, showing every race and who I think will be the winner at each track. But I do think, even if it's not this particular track I predicted, I think he will definitely get a race win. Because with that car being at the level it's at least to start the season, there will come a race where he will be on form and the car will be on form and he will deliver. I have no doubt about that. So watch out for Kimi Antonelli, who is quite possibly F1's next big thing. 6th place, maybe surprising, but I'm going Lewis Hamilton. I just don't think he will be massively better than he was at the in 2024. He will win more than one race in 2025, absolutely. He's not going to go the whole season winless in a car that will win races, but I just think on a consistent basis he won't be on the level of his teammate enough to be beating Leclerc, and will be lagging behind a bit more, I think, due to the Ferrari car having certain issues, at least for the first half of the season, relating to maybe race performance. So, yeah, I don't have the biggest hopes, I will say, for Lewis Hamilton. If the Ferrari car in Melbourne proves to be a lot quicker than I think it will be, then great. I think that will help Lewis Hamilton's season a lot. But simply put, he's not beating Leclerc. I think Leclerc has been performing at a better level than Lewis has been, probably since the start of this ground effect era at the start of 2022. And if he's not beating Leclerc, then of course he's not winning an 8th World Championship. But absolutely, he will still make his contributions. Again, if the Ferrari car is a bit quicker than I'm saying it will be, based off of just how I thought it looked in testing, he could still absolutely contribute to Ferrari, maybe winning the Constructors title. So it is not a dead and buried season for Lewis Hamilton. In 5th place, continuing much of the great form of last year, will be George Russell in the Mercedes. He will pick up more than one race win in 2025 and might not have quite exactly as great of a season as last year, but it will be around about the same level. He will be on the podium quite a few times. Like I said, he'll get more than one race win. What is going to be interesting, though, is if Mercedes do have really good race pace and they can, regularly gain, say, a couple positions per race compared to where they, starting on the grid. If Russell can keep up that consistency of being on the podium and, here and there winning races, absolutely Russell can win the championship in 2025. But it really does come down to the car, I think, in regards to what Russell does with the championship. I don't think the car will be regularly up there enough for that to happen. But again, if I'm wrong and it is quite a bit quicker than I'm expecting, then there's no reason why he can't win the championship. And if it is as good, that Mercedes car, as I think it is, then yeah, 5th place in the championship is the best I think he can do. 4th place, a very close 4th place, I think it will be with 3rd, is going to be Oscar Piastri, who I think will be closer to Lando Norris in 2025 than compared he was in 2024. He will pick up his own amount of race wins, but just not as many race wins as Lando Norris, and will be fighting more so for around 3rd, 4th in the championship, and maybe a lot of the time 3rd and 4th in the Grand Prix as well. Oscar is a very good driver. I like him a lot. He has a lot of very good skills, but I just don't think he has the consistent all-around game to be winning the championship, I'm afraid. And I still think Lando is the best driver at McLaren, purely because Lando is quicker on a more consistent basis than Oscar is. But again, Oscar will win his races. It's a very quick car. Oscar will be on the podium quite a few times, but just not enough to be, I think, fighting hard for the championship in the final, say, 3rd of the season. And just ahead of him in 3rd, continuing the great form from last year and picking up his own amount of race wins, will be Charles Leclerc. Unfortunately for Leclerc, I don't think he'll win the championship because mainly the car just will not be overall good enough for him to do that in 2025. But he will have, I think, a pretty similar season to last year where he picks up his wins, a lot of podiums, a lot of the times he will be probably one of the best performing on the grid in a lot of the races. But the car will just be missing that extra 2 to 3 tenths of a second that he would need to win those extra few races and then maybe win the championship. Again, with Ferrari, I really hope I'm wrong because the hype around them this season is so big, especially coming into this first Grand Prix in Melbourne. But I just don't think the car is good enough, I'm afraid. So yeah, Leclerc, I am going third. And finishing as your runner-up in 2025 will be Lando Norris, who will be closer to Max Verstappen than he was at the end of last season. He will start the season, Lando, very well. A lot of the time it will be because of how good the car is. McLaren, as I said, for the first 10 to 12 races, I think will have definitely the best car. Not in every Grand Prix weekend, but most Grand Prix weekends. And I think Lando will start the season pretty hot. And I wouldn't be surprised if we come to the British Grand Prix, Lando's home race. Would not be surprised if Lando is leading the championship going into that race. And actually, I think he will be leading the championship going into about that part of the season. But again, because Red Bull in the second half of the year will improve and their pace will improve, Max will be up there a lot more regular, fighting for the win, and we know what that means. It means Max Verstappen getting a lot more race wins, and then as the season goes on, Max will overcome the deficit, take the lead of the championship, and eventually Max Verstappen will become a 5-time Drivers' World Champion and complete his 5th consecutive championship. It will be again a close fight between Max Verstappen and Lando Norris. Piastri and Leclerc will be in there to a degree, I think, in the first half of the season, but after the summer break, it will be Max versus Lando. And like I said, because the Red Bull car will improve, Max will improve his results, and in the second half of the season, when it really comes down to where the money is made in Formula One, Max will be the one delivering more so than Lando, who I think will wilt a bit under the pressure, just like he did last year. So those are my Drivers' Championship predictions. But one other thing I want to show you guys is my list of race winners in terms of, for each race, who I think will win what particular race. And of course, there's 24 races, so it took quite a while to go through this and to make my predictions, but let's go through them. So to start the season, I do think Max Verstappen will win the first Grand Prix. I just think the Red Bull car will be close enough to fight for the win around that type of track, and I think Max will deliver in a close fight with McLaren. Then Lando, I think, wins the next couple of races after that at 2 circuits where McLaren should be very quick. Leclerc then I think takes Ferrari's first win in Bahrain, with Piastri then winning in Saudi Arabia. Piastri always has been quick in Saudi Arabia. Then in Miami, I think Max will get the win that he should have maybe got last year. Imola, I think that suits the McLaren car very well. Lando, I think, takes the win. George Russell, I think, wins in Monaco. Last season, Mercedes were pretty quick at street circuits. So, yeah, I think Russell will win the Monaco Grand Prix. Lando then will win in Spain. That track suits the McLaren car really well. Canadian Grand Prix, I'm going for Lewis Hamilton to win that Grand Prix for Ferrari. And then in Austria, Verstappen, I think, will win, and this will be the real start of Red Bull's improvement in the second half of the season. Oscar Piastri, I think, takes the win at Silverstone, mainly because even though McLaren will have probably the best car, I think Lando will crack under the pressure of having the expectation of having really to win that race, and Oscar, I think, will take the win instead. Oscar has always been very quick at Silverstone, so it's definitely plausible that could happen. Then at Spa, Verstappen, I think, wins that. Verstappen has been dominating lately at Spa. Would have won last year if it wasn't for the grid penalty. In Hungary, I think Norris wins. McLaren car should be very quick there. Zandvoort, Max returns to the top step. And then at Monza, Lewis Hamilton returns to the top step, winning for Ferrari. That is going to be amazing if that does happen, if Lewis Hamilton wins for Ferrari at Monza. That is a moment you are not going to want to miss in 2025, if again, that does indeed happen. Baku, I think Leclerc gets the win he should have got in 2024. Singapore, I think Russell will win there. Again, Mercedes will be strong, I think, at street circuits. Austin, Max Verstappen, I think will win. It'd be a key win, I think, at that part of the season. In Mexico, Lando Norris, I think, will take his final win of the season in Mexico, with Leclerc then winning in Brazil. Kimi Antonelli, I think, wins in Las Vegas. I know he's never raced there before, but I just think he will win one of those street races that we'll be going to this year. Then in Qatar, Piastri, I think, finally wins at that track. The track he's been very good at, and the McLaren car should be pretty good at. And then the final Grand Prix of the season, Max Verstappen wins, and maybe that race will also be the race where he wins the World Championship. It'll either be there or maybe in Vegas or Qatar. I don't know exactly, but I do know he'll win the championship. So here is also a list of the winners and who will have the most wins. Verstappen, I think, will take 7 wins. 6 for Lando, 3 for Leclerc, 3 for Piastri, 2 for Hamilton, 2 for Russell, and 1 for Antonelli. So that is, 7 different winners this year. I think that'd be enough for us to be excited for the 2025 season. But those are my final predictions. We will see in December just how correct I was. But let me know, guys, in the comments section, do you agree or disagree with my predictions? And give me your predictions for the top 10 of the Drivers' Championship and for the top 10 of the Constructors. Let me know, and like I said, but when we come to the end of the season, we'll see who was correct and see who wasn't. Maybe Max will not win his 5th championship. Maybe McLaren won't win the Constructors' Championship. And dare I say, given all the hype, maybe Ferrari will finally deliver a championship, the first since 2008. Or maybe Mercedes will return to, maybe you could say, their rightful place, which is at the very top of Formula 1. Much stuff to find out in 2025, and we'll find out a lot more this weekend in Melbourne, and what promises to be a pretty competitive and good weekend at the Australian Grand Prix. But again, let me know in the comments, how do you think the season will go? And until my next bit of content, guys, which will be me streaming this Friday night to preview qualifying for the Australian Grand Prix. Now, remember, I will be doing a watch along on Saturday morning and Sunday morning for qualifying and the race respectively. Until then, guys, it has been me, Chazza HD. Goodbye.